Archaeologists believe the answer lies in organization and in faith strong enough to command it. To the circles until the entire complex was sealed beneath the ground. No civilization before or since has ever done